I know the show has now been out for long enough that all the people on Twitter who defended it have already completely forgotten about it, but I started this public torture session and by God I'm going to finish it. Anyway, hey, remember how incredulous I was at spending an hour on Kyoshi Island? Hope you're ready for 2 hours straight of Omashu. Let's get this over with. I don't have a lot I missed from the last episode, although I did want to highlight a pretty insightful comment from an actual female martial arts instructor who had quite a lot to say on just how awful Suki's entire conduct was throughout the entire last episode. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'll leave the comments up on screen for you to read through yourselves, but she points out how Suki's unprofessional demeanor not only ironically makes her an overly emotional lovesick creep who demonstrably isn't cut out to do anything she set up to do, classic girl power writing right there guys, but also her actual conduct during training is indeed flat out abusive and potentially even dangerous. She even breaks down the whole training sequence dance shit. I just thought that was cringe on a surface level, but she breaks it down even further by pointing out just how worthless it is as actual training. And she's totally right. The lack of dialogue here isn't just distracting because these are supposed to be characters in a scene building a relationship with one another far more explicitly than they were in the original show, but she literally doesn't even tell him what he's supposed to be doing as a trainer. She just starts doing random poses and shit. She told him what to do in the original.
It's not about strength. Our technique is about using your opponent's force against them. Loosen up. Think of the fan as an extension of your arm. Wait for an opening and then...
This is definitely something that should have stuck out more to me, and it's shit like this and also the wonky ass bending choreography that makes it extremely clear they didn't have an actual martial artist doing any work on the show like the original did. And the original show was animated. They didn't even have to give actual actors choreography, they just did it because they actually gave a shit about those kinds of details in the show. I wonder what Sifu Kisu, the martial arts choreographer of the original show and Legend of Korra, as well as the inspiration for the character of Master Piandao, thinks of this show. Oh, that's unfortunate. Anyway, I had to highlight that comment because it's too good of a breakdown to just leave down there, and it deserved a bit more attention. I also got another comment that was a pretty excellent dissection of Zhao's character in the original, and the effect he had on the story, but I want to save that one for later once we start talking about Zhao a bit more. I'll get another chance with him, I won't with Suki. Now let's get back to the garbage. Alright, the beginning of this episode starts in the Fire Nation capital city, and it covers a scene completely original to this show. A group of rebellious Fire Nation insurgents are planning to invade the palace and assassinate the Fire Lord. Okay, that's interesting. I might be able to get on board with this. We did see in the original show that some people were suffering under the Fire Nation's rule, but this was pretty limited and didn't lead to any kind of internal rebellious movement. One of those instances was in The Painted Lady, which is one of the worst episodes of the original series, and another was The Headband, which showed Fire Nation kids being suppressed by their school system, even if they didn't realize it because they didn't know any better. Seeing actual political rebels fighting back against the regime could be interesting. In fact, maybe too interesting. This isn't really something you can just gloss over quickly and then never mention again. You'd want to focus on how these people were able to work past the historical revisionism, indoctrination, and misinformation that's been going around for so long and is so effective that everyone from the student's Aang's age to his middle-aged teachers are absolutely die-hard Fire Nation supporters. Not to say that they can't do that, but I'd like a bit more in terms of motivation and reasoning behind such a potentially impactful political force than we end up getting, which is that these people had family who died while conscripted and so therefore the war is bad. That is not really how it works in basically any culture, especially one like the Fire Nations. Historically, dying in battle was usually seen as pretty glorious. That's certainly how it was in more antiquated cultures. It wasn't until around World War I that the whole war is hell mentality started gaining traction, because no one even knew what the hell the war was for, and people were dying by the truckloads in unimaginably gruesome ways, the likes of which had never been seen before. The people of the Fire Nation do know what the war is for, or at least their own version of its purpose. They've been taught the purpose of it ever since they were kids. It's part of what makes the indoctrination so effective. Now, of course, Iroh is actually an example of this being done in the original show. But for one thing, we know that Iroh was a lot different from the rest of the Fire Nation right from the start, since he's actually a very well-established character. His abandonment of the siege of Ba Sing Se was viewed as pretty disgraceful by all accounts, with Azula commenting that he should have just burned the city to the ground in Lu Ten's honor, and more importantly, he just retired from the military as a result of this. He didn't outright turn his back on his own nation, you know, not until they tried to kill him and or the moon first. A lot of work was put into showing how Iroh was different and the events that made him change. which you would ideally want to do here with these characters or this anti-Ozai movement if they were ever going to be mentioned again. Now, I don't think it's a bad idea at all to show Fire Nation citizens being morally righteous. In fact, something that I love about the original show is how it treats the common people of the Fire Nation. Unless they're a villain of the week, most people in the Fire Nation seem pretty normal. Sometimes saving Fire Nation citizens was the goal for the gang in that particular episode. And even the soldiers were the source of plenty of laughs. This shows that even though they were the enemy faction, the Fire Nation itself wasn't the enemy. It was more so Ozai in particular and the war itself that he kept going that was the enemy. And if it was stopped, the people of the Fire Nation could be easily redeemed, and the average citizen would be perfectly happy to see the war come to an end no matter the outcome. So conceptually, I'm cool with this as an idea, but let's see where it goes. One of the rebels points out that they don't have the numbers to do this job, which is just a clunky piece of dialogue after we've apparently just established that everything is set. Dialogue continues to not be this show's strong suit. I can see why they avoid it when they can, even if that's equally cringe. The leader guy doesn't care, saying they have the anger and grief to drive them, and clunkily introduces this totally not suspicious girl. So yeah, if you watch any of the promotional material, you'd know this is Azula. I wasn't surprised by it, and neither are you. I have so much to say about Azula in this show, and in this episode really, but I'll wait until she's properly introduced. She gives a little story, and by story, I mean sentence, about how she lost her mother and brother in the siege of Ba Sing Se. Interesting that her cousin goes unmentioned, but I like how she mixes in a little bit of truth with her lie, since she has basically lost those people in her life because of the Fire Nation. That's something that real pathological liars will do to make themselves seem more convincing. Also, the leader guy has a White Lotus tattoo on his arm, so I guess these guys are members of the White Lotus Society? That makes Azula's infiltration a bit more confusing. Even Iroh, who was a senior member who personally knew this guy, still had to go through the whole rigmarole with the Pai Sho game to get help from him. If Azula, and by extension Ozai, know about the White Lotus and how to infiltrate them, that kind of puts a damper on them as a top secret society, doesn't it? Also, way to go secret society, brand yourselves with your logo, that's inconspicuous. The most generous interpretation I'll give this is that it's just an Easter egg and not meant to actually mean anything, which is probably the case since all these people die in like 2 minutes. Oh yeah, spoilers. Azula leads them into the palace and it's an ambush, so yeah, obviously. Oh look, they have Ozai emerging from the shadows, even though they already revealed him last episode. That doesn't remind me of anything.
Yes.
Ozai basically says, hey, isn't our nation's prosperity pretty radical for the people who aren't dead in the war? And then Rebel Man is just like, but what about people who are dead in the war? And Ozai just doesn't really have a response for that. Oh, except for this.
Do not speak to me of loss.
Excuse me, what the fuck are you talking about? Ozai, the only people you've lost in your life are the people that you yourself removed from it. You had Azulon killed, you had Ursa banished, and you had Zuko banished. Unless you're somehow even more broken up about Lu Ten's death than Iroh is, I really need you to shut your incredibly chiseled mouth right the fuck now, because under no circumstances will I tolerate some dogshit sob story for Ozai of all people about loss. Whatever, then he gives the big dramatic reveal to Azula, and everyone whispers among themselves like, oh my god, Azula? The princess? Princess Azula? And I'm just over here like, wait a minute, how are you guys not familiar with her already? Like, how did they not recognize her? I'm pretty sure Azula is a public figure. Her appearance should not be a mystery to you. I'm not saying you guys should have been making noodle portraits of her in class or anything, but you should at least know what she looks like. Hell, I would say that even knowing of her existence would make allowing a girl around the age of the princess, who happens to be the only person who can get you inside of the royal palace onto your hit squad, is kind of a dumb idea? Which is another thing. I'm confused as to why Ozai chose Azula of all people for this job in particular. These guys seem pretty desperate, and more importantly, gullible and stupid. I think literally anyone would have done the job, unless you needed someone who was just so good at basic lying with the one-sentence story she gave that you needed Azula to work her 10 charisma magic on these guys. In the original series, Ozai entrusted the task of capturing Zuko and Iroh to Azula because she was the best person for the job. She was a close family member, a master manipulator, and a prodigious combatant, so even if they put up a fight, it could be trusted that she would overpower them. If not for Iroh's lightning redirection, that would have been the correct assumption. but Ozai very clearly didn't know about that. The point is, he entrusted that task to Azula because it was something that no one else could be trusted to do. Well, this task is so pedestrian that I'm honestly surprised he didn't send her out to just burn them alive outright instead of setting up this ambush. Your daughter is a fucking walking psychopathic nuke. The old you was smart enough to use that to his advantage. And it's especially confusing that they're leading them into this ambush instead of killing them outright if they aren't going to bother interrogating them. Which is yet another thing, why the fuck aren't you interrogating them? There's no way these are all of the anti-Ozai rebels out there. Surely these guys have some pertinent information on where to find more. But maybe they're going somewhere that's totally not retarded with this. We'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so whatever, Rebel Guy is all grumpy, but he says that maybe they haven't stopped Ozai, but someone will. Someone who has the power to restore balance to the world. The master of all four elements, who has returned to— Okay, hang the fuck on. How in the fuck has this information leaked to these random chuckle fucks before it leaked to Azula? Yeah, not only did Ozai not readily confide this in her, his favorite child to begin with, but this is the first she's hearing about the Avatar's return. From some random insurgents who just know it because I guess they've read the script. Maybe these guys happened to be at Roku's temple and saw the glowing. After all, it's not very hard to get over there extremely quickly. Also, wait a second, how can they possibly know this? Azula is their only contact who's actually inside the palace, and she doesn't know about it. So that means either Zhao has been sending Hawks out by the truckload, so this information is just public knowledge except to Azula specifically, which I don't think is the case because that's stupid, or it's spread to multiple people inside the palace, one of whom is a spy for these insurgents who's feeding information to them. Don't you find the fact that these people knew this top secret information concerning Ozai? What's more is that once Azula finds out that Zuko has found the Avatar, Ozai seems almost impressed with Zuko.
Zuko has found the Avatar?
Your brother has done the impossible, just as I'd asked.
First of all, no the fuck he hasn't. Ozai wouldn't give two fucks about whether or not Zuko found the Avatar.
Iroh is a traitor, and your brother Zuko is a failure.
Capturing him and bringing him back would suffice, since that's what he was told to do in the first place. You don't succeed in the wild goose chase by just finding the goose. Bring that sucker home and get basting. Second of all, Ozai should not be impressed with Zuko. He's only finally pleased with Zuko once he helps conquer the final Earth Kingdom stronghold and is said to have personally killed the Avatar. Even then, Zuko is still clearly walking a razor's edge around the man. Ozai does not like this little fuck. He never has. And this is obvious from the time Zuko and Azula are children. Zuko is the least favorite child. He was favored by Ursa and Iroh, but not by Ozai, who couldn't stand the little twerp. Which brings us to the next point. Azula is threatened by this praise of Zuko, which she should not be. Azula is the favorite child. She was born lucky, and Zuko was lucky to be born. She knows damn well her standing with Ozai is better than that of Zuko. Partially because she gets to sleep in her own bed and all of her fucking face is still intact. She would never feel threatened by this. But you see, this is intentional. Ozai isn't genuinely praising Zuko. He's purposefully goading a rivalry between Azula and Zuko that already existed because, he wants Azula to push herself more? This Azula?
Almost perfect. One hair out of place.
Almost isn't good enough.
Or maybe this Azula? Oh, we'll get to the fucking archery scene. Azula pushes herself plenty. She's an absurd perfectionist. It's literally the first character trait we get out of her, unless you count her sadism during Zuko's Agni Kai. Oh, and by the way, this is basically all we get of Azula for this entire season. Oh, not this scene alone. There's plenty more of her, unfortunately. But this concept that Ozai is being manipulative in order to, I guess, give Azula the perfectionist trait she already had in her first speaking scene of the original show. Never mind the fact that Azula being a master manipulator herself would never fall for something like this, even from her own father, but that just means this is all a massive fucking waste of time for the sake of characterizing Ozai as someone who likes to play games, and Azula as someone who is incredibly easy to manipulate and desperate for her father's approval, as if she doesn't already have that approval to begin with. You have turned Azula into Zuko. I don't think I need to explain why that's a bad thing. It's very clear that Azula got her manipulative streak from her father in the original show. This fucking fadeaway is not exactly subtle, as these two characters are doing the exact same thing in stalling for time until the eclipse runs its course by manipulating other characters with information they desperately want to know and never intend to reveal. But I guess even though Azula learned all of her lying and manipulation skills from Ozai, she can't tell when she herself is being manipulated. Why are you so fucking insistent on making all of the women in this show morons? The only reason I can possibly think of for doing any of this is if you're making so Ozai is pushing her harder than she already pushes herself in an attempt to make Azula more sympathetic. Princess smiles sadistically while electrocuting a child to death Azula needed an arc that makes the audience sympathize with her before she gets a chance to actually do anything plot relevant in regards to the main cast or demonstrate her character traits in any capacity outside of this new context. God damn it, and we haven't even reached the title card yet. Oh hey, there it is. Oh yeah, this episode is about Omashu. I for one can't wait.